Okay, Anatoly. So you're CEO of a technology company, but have you ever thought about giving it all up and opening your own brewery or winery?
Well, that's a good question. Not in recent years, but the closest moment when I was opening my production of the beverage was when I was a student, and we were having a party, and we were out of booze and went to a corner store, bought some cheapest wine because we didn't have enough money to buy a normal one, and it was horrible experience. So after all of that, I thought when I became rich and famous, I will make my own thing, and that will be the best on the market.
Yeah, I see. Because, really, I do believe that our today's guest has another reason to open his winery. But what's really fascinating, he's able to combine it with his financial business and running them both successfully. So, hi guys, here's our new episode of a Product Drama podcast. This is Anatoly,
And this is Max.
and today we have founder and CEO of Ongoing Operations and Credit Union 2.0, Kirk Drake. Hi Kirk.
How you doing?
Good morning. How you guys doing today?
Okie dokie. So, you are working with a lot of credit union startups.
Correct.
What is the process that you put your those companies through?
Yeah. So we specialize kind of at the intersection of where kind of the legacy incumbents, banks and credit unions, and fintechs, the kind of upstarts, work together. And so what we're really good at is kind of client 2 through 50 or so. We're not so good at finding client number 1. Not that we can't do it. It just tends to be every bit as much work as an entrepreneur to find client 1 as it does the second phase of that. And we have a lot more leverage and experience to help the entrepreneur in that kind of second batch of things. So generally, the way we do that, there's 3 or 4 components of it. The first is something we call FinTech launch, where we take an early stage FinTech that wants to work with credit unions. We either do an adjacent market test, meaning they've got their product working in some other aspect of financial services, and we're just trying to figure out, will it work with credit unions? The second component is sort of cold lead generation. So can we get a group of credit unions interested through an email campaign and build a basic email marketing list for that fintech to find? So there's about 5,500 credit unions here in the US. So can we find some group, some subset, 20 or so, that have that problem that the fintech solves right now, that they can begin having material conversations with in that respect? So that's, I would say, 1 part email marketing, 1 part brand awareness, and 1 part influencer marketing to kind of tell that story and bring those in. The second big component is something we call quarterly FinTech calls. So we work with a couple hundred credit unions here in the US where we talk to them quarterly and pitch 5 FinTech ideas in that process. And so in that, as the FinTech kind of goes to that first phase and we get to learn them, we go through a sales modeling exercise to really help us understand, how does this FinTech or this product fit in the marketplace compared to other things? Because oftentimes I think when people are buying products, they're trying to figure out, okay, you said it's a laptop, but how does a Microsoft tablet compared to an Apple laptop compared to the gamer's laptop, right? And they're all laptops, but they're not all equal, right? So we kind of go through what we call a pre-frame model to figure that out and to help us really be able to explain that in the marketplace as we're pitching to these different credit unions. And then we also simultaneously gather information back from all the credit unions about what they're seeing, who the competitors are, and so that ends up being a nice two-way street where not only do we get to educate the credit unions, but we also get to educate the fintechs on what else is in the marketplace that they may not be seeing. And we produce what we call the 2.0 guides out of that. So those would be like checking accounts 2.0 or payments 2.0 or things like that. And then the third kind of big bucket, we have a mastermind of FinTech and entrepreneurs and credit union leaders that are looking to learn from each other about how to structure and build partnerships and create change either through digital transformation or by bringing additional products and services into those credit unions. And then lastly, we have a FinTech fund where we actually invest in some of these early stage FinTechs as they've gone through this process once we kind of see what their product market fit is and how they're interacting with the credit unions. So it's a dull day, yeah.
Thanks for that laptop, analogy, because I remember when I chose my recent one, and it's like I was wondering, I want a gamer one, but after quick few days of choosing, I decided to quit gaming at all. That was like the easiest solution. And but speaking of credit unions, are there any specifics in credit union startups that separates it from fintech ones?
So generally speaking, the fintechs that are interested in working with credit unions fall in love with kind of the social mission of credit unions. So credit unions are nonprofits. They're here to build their communities and their groups of membership. And so I think in kind of the modern era of, socially conscious businesses, credit unions fit that mold really effectively. And you can feel, I've worked with credit unions since I started a high school bank. It's a whole nother podcast. And then started, when I got to college, I applied for a bunch of bank jobs. Nobody called me back. I started freaking out and applied for a bunch of credit union jobs when I realized I had put the wrong phone number on my resume. So I started working with a bunch of credit unions at that point and just fell in love with the kind of mission, purpose, vision. And so it's, if you're a fintech that isn't, not that you can't make $1 billion in credit unions, but generally speaking, the fintechs and the businesses that are here are out for change, for fairness, for, creating true relationships, and they want to work with people that are fair and, socially conscious and not just trying to make a quick buck. Right.
And comparing credit union startups with wine ones, is there a big difference there?
It's what's been most fascinating. So I wrote Credit Union 2.0, and we started the winery in the same year. And so it's been 4 or 5 years on each of those. And it is really fascinating how both businesses, banking and wine are probably two of the oldest businesses on the planet, right? And both of them really struggle from the same types of things because at its core, wine starts with farming, and then it's like a manufacturing process that you can do without chemistry. It doesn't generally turn out very well, but you can do it. And so you have this, kind of legacy experience and wisdom passed on from generations in that. And then the reality is, in today's world, selling wine through a tasting room is not all that different than a physical bank branch, right? In terms of really requiring that. But I would argue both of those establishments are irrelevant, and you can actually build relationships with intangible products and tangible products completely virtually in a digitally transformed world. And so it ends up being that they actually have a bizarre number of similarities. And I've since concluded that this is a universal problem in every industry. It has nothing to do with banking. It has nothing to do with wine. It's every industry is struggling from the impact of internet and computers, and we're still adapting to that as humans. And then I think the next big wave of it is all going to be AI, machine learning, and we're not even, I feel like COVID-19 sped us up 10 years on the digital transformation side of things, but I don't at all think we've done all that much on the data, automation, AI, artificial intelligence side of things. So
yeah, when you mentioned AI, I remember being in Napa and seeing how grapes are being picked up. And I was just thinking, like, well, that's a good thing to create an AI robot that will be going through rows of grapes and will be picking up like good ones and leaving the bad ones.
Yeah, you already see it. We, out here we've got, we don't use it. We're not that big, but they have AI sprayers that as you're spraying, they're selectively picking which leaves to spray in that. And you have optical sorters for the grape side of things when you're, after you harvest it all in that piece. And so you're right. The funny part about it though is when you're making wine is one of the most chemically complex things. Probably the human body is probably one of the only things that's more crazily complex, right? Yet we really don't have all that much data or science to be able to measure all the different components, flavor profiles, complexity of wine. So I'm not sure AI is going to be able to do all that much when we don't even have the baseline chemistry, or spent much time focused on that, in any real shape or any real way. So I think the AI impacts will be more on the farming side, much less on the winemaking side.
But it certainly can help to progress. But getting back to I feel we are moving away from the main topic of the discussion.
Sure.
Getting back to the process. Yes. So you name lots of things and that you do. Where in all of this is the place for the product managers? Do you advise companies to hire a product manager, or do you act like a product manager for them?
Yeah, so I think in the early stage, I think there's definitely a product management component of what we do. I wouldn't say that at the early side, if you're building a software-based fintech and a mobile app, absolutely you need a product manager to kind of connect the dots between the developers and all of those pieces. In many cases, we're kind of pre that point, right? They've got an idea, they're solving a business problem, maybe it's an innovative mortgage loan or a credit repair type, software solution. And so the product manager, I would say, in my opinion, comes when you've got 5 to 10 clients using the thing, and you're kind of past that MVP. Not that I'm opposed to hiring it sooner. It's just, generally speaking, I feel like you don't quite know what you're even going to build yet, right? You may have a vision, but you almost need a chunk of data and experience before you're ready to kind of insert the product manager into that function.
But in my opinion, product manager is the person who does the strategy. In your case, who is the source for the strategy of the startup?
Yeah, so generally the entrepreneur will kind of have this vision and this idea, and then they'll have landed their first credit union or two, and now they're in the mode of, okay, we've got a couple credit unions, we know this is working, and the entrepreneur is playing that product manager role, I think, early on, and then as it kind of moves through that whole journey, and it begins to scale up, then they'll bring more formal product management and strategy into that. Because I think in the early stage, you could bet a lot of money on a product manager and the strategy without really knowing if there's a marketplace.
I also see that. And about the terms that you mentioned, like you mentioned a BrandBucket. But what do you usually put in BrandBucket? Can you please share more about your vision for the definition?
Yeah, so I haven't seen this anyplace else, but I call it the BrandBucket, and the idea is in the early stage, you're creating almost like a product category and concept that is going to allow you to swap out parts and pieces over time, but have the relationship and the ideology kind of sold. So I think maybe a better way to think of it is, in the early stages, you're selling, even before you have a product, you're still selling, right? And you're selling a concept, right? And if you define that concept too narrowly around a particular problem, then you don't have the leeway and flexibility to kind of evolve the product, the strategy, the pricing, any of those components over time. And so the brand bucket gives you, hey, we're going to solve, think of, so for example, in the early stage of the winery, we knew we were going to solve creating a winery, right? But we didn't know if we were going to make Malbec, Syrah, Chardonnay, those kind of things. And so you start with a high level brand of that, and then you kind of begin working down, and you can have multiple iterations kind of within that bucket. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm really surprised that recently, we didn't see this term a lot in the internet, because when we first heard about BrandBucket from you, we decided hey, we're gonna Google what is it, what is the definition, but still, so it has a really, full of life and full of sense concept, but not a lot of companies are using it right now.
I wonder if winery is still going through that process of forming mission and vision as any other software companies do or other.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, to me, that's universal for the company. You've got to have that product vision, market, idea of what you're trying to do before you really start figuring out the how, right? You got to solve why and kind of what, and then you start moving into the how and when, pieces of it. So.
But speaking of launching every product, is there any specific marketing strategies that you usually keep straight on?
Yeah, so the way I go about it, there's kind of, I would say, 3 big high level components and then a couple more micro components. So the high level, I start with something called a painted picture or vivid vision, written by a guy named Cameron Harold, which is really like a 3 to 5 page vision of your company, what your values are, who you're making this for, that really high level piece of it. Then I usually use a strategy scorecard to build 5 strategies that are going to help you build that vision, and then 5 tactics per strategy and the KPIs that go along with that. So you start going from really big picture to really tactical picture. And then that third phase, I think, is really where you start building the brand piece of it or the product recognition. And I do 2 exercises universally. So one is what I call the 25-word pitch, which is how do I get this concept down to a 25-word or less soundbite that if I told my mom what I was doing, she just gets instantaneously what problem I'm solving and how I do it. It's really, really difficult to kind of get it whittled down to that point. But when you do, it can become viral and powerful at that point. The second thing I do is an Archetype workshop where you roll through. So have you guys ever heard of an Archetype?
No.
Okay. So an Archetype is rooted in kind of Greek mythology. Think about the fact that going all the way back to Roman Greek times, there were these fables, these stories, Shakespeare, whatever, where we know there's 12 different archetypes and they have these classic hero journeys, villain journeys, whatever. Well, it turns out you can relate those 12 concepts to particular brands or visions or even a product concept. And so if you correlate those back and you say, okay, you think of Harley Davidson is your outsider brand, right? Versus Levi's jeans is your everyday guy brand, right? 2 very different stories, but we also instinctively know the story arc of the outsider, and we know the story arc of the everyday guy, right? And we know it through pop culture, TV. It's just kind of like all humans know these 12 story arcs. And so once you know those, then you kind of work backwards and you map the brand story or the product story to the normal segments and life stages that would have gone along with that archetype. So if you're the hero, right? There's a great book called The Hero or the Outlaw. It's definitely challenging. It's a dense book, but conceptually it's great. So if you map that hero journey, they're going to go up, they're going to fail at something, they're going to crest, and then they're going to solve this, critical villain problem and then come back up. And there's always a villain in the hero journey, right? So if you're telling the story of your product or your brand, you've got to do that same thing. We've got this great idea. It's amazing. right? I'm an everyday guy becoming a hero, and here's the press releases and the story that go along with that. Here's the climax. Oh no, big bad evil competitor is on the scene. They're going to crush us. You have some tragedy and some intentional setbacks, right? And then as you hit the bottom, you have this aha zen moment of how you're really going to save the world, and now you have the trajectory on the upside of that. And Little, you get this right when you have the chills. Like I just all my hair is standing on end because when you describe that and you think about a brand that tells that story, it just resonates perfectly. And so the counter example of this, so I'm sure you're familiar with Coca-Cola. They are an innocent brand, right? So they only and so innocents don't create new things, right? So when Coke came out with New Coke, what happened, right? It's an epic failure because the community, the people who buy Coke are like, what's this? You're the innocent. You're safety and soundness. You don't create new things. I'm not touching it, right? And so it's really fascinating how that archetype piece, to me, once you know what the archetype is, that becomes a great filter for what things you do, what things you don't, how you tell the story of the product and those pieces. And then ultimately you can actually work that back to your content marketing strategy, your press releases. And then I always like to advise what you do is, so most entrepreneurs, when they're telling the product or the brand launch, tell success as it happens, right? So imagine, like, these two people just teamed up. They came with this product idea. They launched it. That's what we think of as how this works. Now, reality in entrepreneurship, which I'm sure is the same with product management, the journey to a successful product is not a straight line, right? Right. So instead what happens is, these two teamed up, these people had a fight, this widget didn't work, version 1.3 had an epic failure, which caused us to think about solving the problem this way. But if you think about, you're excited and you're enthusiastic and you're releasing, imagine if once a week you said, you told the story and all you got this weekly snippet based on where you were, the story doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it's like reading Harry Potter, but you're reading chapter 1, chapter 17, chapter 3, chapter 9, chapter 2. You're like, what? I don't understand what's happening at all. Well, most of us, when we're telling the stories of our products or our brands, that's what we're doing. We're telling them in the order of how it happened, not the order of how it actually makes sense. And so if you wait 3 months and you gather up all the wins and failures of that 3 months, and then you put them in the right order, and then you start releasing the news, the story resonates and connects with people much better because it makes sense in our brains and it comes back to that archetype concept. So.
Think in stories, and I attended the scenario building class the other day, and he was telling exactly the same thing. It just was projected on your main character story, and it has to go like waves.
Yeah, and all events should be connected, because if your product gonna be something like now Voldemort kills Dumbledore's hands and gets to Dumbledore in dinner room in the next chapters, it's gonna be ridiculous for users. So having everything connected and moving straight in your direction is important.
I just since we are discussing these ups and downs, and what is the place for your startups for experimenting? How you encourage them to experiment, try new things, new approaches?
So usually, I wouldn't say that we've got a formal piece of this. I actually spent a lot of time. I don't know. I woke up at 2 a.m. last night having a dream about doing pilot projects and how do you systemically get 500 credit units to participate and do a whole bunch of pilots, which would give you enough data to figure out, where the opportunities really are. So it's funny that that question is very timely in my mind. And I have not solved this, by the way. It's just what I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about because I'm weird like that. So we usually, I try to kind of break it into three test scenarios. So the first is what I call there's a group of people out there who will happily give you advice on any product with zero intention to buy it. And that's really dangerous because when you ask for their feedback, they'll give you feedback, but it's not something they actually would ever use. So why do you know? So it's trying to get a caveman to use a laptop. He'll be looking at it like, yeah, well, it looks like a laptop. It's awesome, right? You know, and but it's probably not going to be the right buyer. So usually what I recommend is you start with a one-page overview of the product and you put it in front of your first 3 to 5 people that you're going to pitch it to. You intentionally leave the price off because if someone if they don't ask you the how much question, they don't actually want it. They're lying to you, right? And their feedback is irrelevant, right? And so that is the first test I usually go through is how do we get it down to that one-page overview? Try that 10, 15 times and keep tweaking that one page until some percentage, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, it probably depends on your product and what you're trying to do, ask you the question of how much consistently. And when you're starting to get the how much question, then you start to work backwards of, is this a cost plus model? Is it, and by the way, you should always know your cost plus model. I don't think you should ever sell on cost plus. I think you should always be value driven in that respect. So, but knowing your cost plus will be essential in your long-term, financial planning. So that cost plus model, and then your pricing becomes more of a justification based on what will the market bear and what competitors are doing and what additional services and functionality and value you're creating in that piece. The second big test that I usually like to see is if we send this 25-word pitch to 10 people, how many of them, and this is a really hard thing to measure, but you know it when you hit it. When for example, I was talking to a credit union head of strategy today, and I said, well, hey, we've been thinking about doing A, B, and C. He's like, I saw that on LinkedIn, and someone else told me that you guys were up to that, right? Okay, so when you hear that someone else told them, and it's like, oh, well, what did you hear? And they describe it. If it's like 90% of what you thought you were doing, then you've got that pitch kind of right. And you're starting to hear that resonance in that. Again, back to you need your mom to be able to explain what it is. So this is a funny segue. When I was working at a credit union as the CTO. I was probably 22 or 23 at the time. And my mom called me up. I was probably older. I was probably 26 or 27. And my mom calls me up and she goes, "Hey, Kirk, do you know anybody that works in financial services?" I've got a really big question to ask. And I'm like, what do I have to do? Right? Like I'm a chief technology officer for a credit union. Like I'm pretty much the most knowledgeable person and you think I know nothing, right? Awesome. So that resonance and making sure your mom understands what you do is always, I think, a key part. I'd love to hear how you guys explain to your mothers what you do.
I think I'm gonna do it like tonight, because if I'm gonna ask her what I'm doing, yeah, I do believe that she'll say that sometimes I'm like making some podcast, but it's
right.
not the main part of the job, right?
Right.
So yeah.
But how awesome would be if your mom was like, he helps product managers and product experts learn how to be better at their jobs, right? Like, way better than he makes podcasts, right? Yeah. You're like, yeah, that's exactly what I do.
Way more students, that's for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have any questions except and we already mentioned a lot of books during this episode, but which specifically would you recommend to read, or are there any others that we didn't mention before?
Yeah, so I'm biased, but the Credit Union 2.0 book is a great book to just understand how credit unions think about financial services and fintechs and innovation in that piece. My second book is all about artificial intelligence and banks and credit unions. It's got some great case studies of early startups and how they're approaching different product problems in that piece. It's called Financial. And then other great books that I think I recommend for any entrepreneur early stage piece. So I'm reading one right now called Never Eat Alone. And it's more about networking and how to build kind of a viral network. Really good book, just chock full of great ideas in that one. another good one for early stage guys is it's called Venture Deals, which is all about how venture capital thinks about problems and term sheets and deal structure in the early days. You can't really get away from thinking about that. And then probably one of my all-time favorites is called Double Double, written by Cameron Herold, and he was the COO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and just has a never-ending stream of gems about how to build culture, how to build teams, how to do all those kind of things. But I've got a list of probably 1,000 books I would recommend. So those would be the first ones that jump out. So
yeah, thanks a lot. And one more, and which is really important.
Yeah.
Season 2020. Which wine would you recommend to buy?
Sure.
Your personal taste.
Our 2018 wines just came out, because there's usually about one of the weird parts about wine is there's about a 3-year lag from when you make the wine to when it actually hits the marketplace, which, by the way, from a product management perspective, is like a totally, in an agile world, like when do you have a 3-year lag before when you build something, when you put it in a customer's hands. But our 2018 Malbec is really fantastic. It definitely it's going to be good. It's going to get better and better in bottle. And again, another weird part about product management for wine is when you bottle it, it's different than when you drink it, and it's different 5-7 years later, right? And so the wine goes through this kind of crazy journey that, again, how do you figure that out in day one?
I wonder how it's possible to understand the future wine depending on Beaujolais and Vogue, because this is like it's like a MVP, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So and I will say, rosé and white wines, your shelf, those get out the same season, right? But the red wines really have that complexity to them. So when I've talked about doing a wine experience, and if anybody who's listening to this wanted to do it, I'd be happy to do it one-off and figure it out, of shipping the grape juice at pre-fermentation, so the super sweet just got pressed, then shipping it post-fermentation, then shipping it after it's been in a barrel for 90 days, and then another 90 days and another 90 days. So you're going down the journey with the winemaker as it's living its life, because I will tell you, being on the other side of that, you drink a glass of grape juice that just got pressed. It is the sweetest, most sugary thing you've ever. It's fantastic. You can't drink a lot of it though, because you'll just get diabetes and die. But then
you'll do it anyway one day.
Yeah. But then drinking it and tasting it post fermentation, it's really not good, right? And then you put it in barrels, and it. Sometimes you taste it and it's really good, and other weeks you taste it and it tastes terrible, and it just goes through this journey, and you just have to have faith that this set of things is going to work itself out, and the biology and the chemistry and the integration between the oak barrel and the grapes is all going to come together and produce something magical down the road. But it is definitely, if you ever get the opportunity to go do a barrel tasting at a winery, it'll blow your mind, because you can literally taste. One of the wineries we work with here in town, they had harvested Malbec grapes at 2 weeks early, 2 weeks later when they wanted to, and then 2 weeks late. So the Brix level and the sugars have kind of changed in that 4-week period. Then they put those 3 different versions in 3 different barrel types, right? So they had like heavy toast, light toast, French oak, Hungarian oak, you name it. And so there's 9 configurations of essentially the same grape, just harvested in that range. And you taste all 9, and they are not all that similar, right? They're all wine, right? But totally different flavor profiles and experiences based on those 9 variables, right? So it really is an amazing experience in that respect.
Yeah, I've been to wine tasting, but the way you put it, with all the nuances, that sometimes it may not taste good, sometimes it's good. They don't tell you. They tell you about magic that happens around this process.
Yeah, it's also about story.
It's right around. 9 months to 12 months in barrel, it changes and it starts being consistent at that point. But even then, you got to do things to make it temperature stable and, you know, to actually make it a shelf stable product, right? In that, because you wouldn't want to, you know, but even, I mean, it's things like, anyways, we could spend a whole other podcast on.
Yeah, but they also try to sell you wine, so they never tell you like funny stories about it.
Yeah, it turns out this was terrible, right?
Still, yeah, but drinking wine with a story is, you know, maybe for someone it's like more interesting to have wine with a story. And winemaking is actually an ancient science, and like there's a lot of recipes that have fascinating stories behind them. Okay. Yeah, I think so. It can be it for today. I just want to thank you for a fascinating story about wine and your lovely financial business. Thank you, Anatoly, for your lovely student's booth story. And of course, thank you guys for watching our new episode. I do believe that it was funny, exciting, and also motivational for all of you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Bye-bye. And guys, see you later in our new episodes of Product Drama.
Bye-bye.